Welcome to the Busy Signal. My name is Jim, and this is my retro-nostalgic 80s, 90s, and early 2000s podcast. This show aims to salute all the stuff from back in the day that is now extinct or quickly going that way. At the end of the last episode, I mentioned that I might have a special guest. Well, I brought on a good buddy of mine, Korey Oats. We had a blast revisiting a previous episode I did, Once Common, Now Extinct. That's right. Part 2 of Once Common, Now Extinct. Quick note, this was my first podcast with another person, so the audio that I had recorded during Zoom was kind of on a dodgy internet connection, so there's a couple times where my audio gets a little weird. Not too bad, though. Totally can make out what I'm saying for the most part. There were definitely lessons learned during this podcast, and I'm pretty sure I know how to fix it to prevent it in the future. Also, I know that I usually like to keep these episodes to like 20 minutes or so. This one obviously goes over that by a little bit, but stick around because we had a great time revisiting this episode, and I think you will too. And you could always just hit the speed button and listen to me at 2 times the speed and then let me know which chipmunk I sound like later, Alvin, Simon, or Theodore. So without further delay, Once Common, Now Extinct, Part 2, here we go. Just want to thank Korey Oats for being here with me today on the Busy Signal. Korey, introduce yourself to everybody.
What is going on? My name is Korey Oats. Let's see. I work a lot. I've been a DJ for 20 years. That's pretty much the brand. That's the Korey Oats brand. And longtime friend with Jim. So I'm happy to be able to jump into the talk about the past, the nostalgias that this podcast brings to you every week. Every other week? Is it every other week?
It is a bi-weekly podcast.
There we
I
go.
met you, I think we discussed this, 2000?
2000 sounds right. 2000, 2001, somewhere in that time frame.
So I brought Korey on because I thought it would be really cool because he's 34.
34, yes.
And I'm 42. So there's 8 years. So you still are within my wheelhouse of this podcast, because I had said in the previous podcast that I'd never actually laid down what my parameter for 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was. Mm-hmm. It's actually, since I was born in 81, it's going to be as far back as I can remember, which is probably like 86, maybe 85, right, to 2010. So, so you, since you're just like 8 years younger than me, less than a decade, you are coming at the same nostalgia that I have with a little bit of a different perspective.
Correct, yes.
So I will kick this off. The first thing that we're going to be talking about on this Once Common, Now Extinct, or quickly going that way, Part 2, since the first episode of Once Common, Now Extinct was so far the most popular one, we're going to hit up typewriters first. I don't know, do you remember typewriters since you are younger than I am?
See, I do, and the only thing I was going to say about them is we didn't have them. Like, I was one of the first schools. For some reason, we were super poor, like middle-class town that I lived in, but we had computer and typing classes in like the 4th grade. So like 1999, like 1998, like I'm learning how to like type and do all those things on a computer. The only thing that I really saw typewriters with was at the libraries. They still use them for all like the computer cards, and when they were filling out new stuff, they'd be typing away on a typewriter. That's the only thing I knew. I was like amazed the first time I could see that like they could hit a button and it would still like erase if they like misspelled something. But like an actual typewriter, I never have actually physically used one.
So I grew up with typewriters. Like my mom had one at home for her job, and it was really satisfying to bang on those keys and cha-chunk, 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 cha-chunk. You didn't actually, the typewriter that my mom had at first did not have the option for an erase. So we actually had to use whiteout. Like if you made a mistake, you had to roll the paper up a little bit and then white it out and roll it back down and try and actually line it up so that when you typed again, it wasn't all cockeyed. So I was thinking about typewriters and I was just like, I don't like to do research. I'll say that, 1,000 times throughout this podcast. But I do end up doing a little bit because I start to think, well, how old are typewriters? Like if they're going extinct, how long have they been around? That's not a simple answer. Apparently typewriters are very murky, like they've been around for centuries in one way or another. If we have a loose definition of what a typewriter is, the printing press was the first typewriter.
Fair enough.
Like that kicked off the invention of the typewriter, 1444, Gutenberg. Since then, it's how can we do this faster? How can we make it take up less room in a room?
That's life. That's everything.
Yeah. if you want a trip, you go down that rabbit hole and you look up invented typewriters, and you will see a myriad of different things that they called typewriters over the time. There was a ball that had tons of keys all over it, and they called that a typewriter. I don't even know how that worked.
Ugh.
But there was even like a debate for years on like how the keyboard should be laid out.
Amazing.
Yeah, basically the definition of a typewriter was impressing letters on paper. And eventually I found out in 1910, there was a standardization of typewriters. And then everybody's like, okay, this is a typewriter. This is what we use. Eventually my mom did move on from that manual typewriter and we got an electric typewriter, and it just didn't have the same chunkiness. It didn't have that ka-kunk, that gun noise, you know? It had a hum to it.
So now that I think about it, the electric one was probably the one that I've saw.
Yes, it had a little green screen on it. And it would actually display the letters that you were typing, and you could actually erase, type the delete button, and it would go back, and I thought it was magic, because I'm like, how did it put the ink on there and take the ink right back off? That's weird.
Exactly.
But I grew up with them, and eventually, like you said, in school you had computers. I also had computers in school. We didn't have typewriters in school, but I did, because my mom had a typewriter at home. I did type a few papers, like second, third grade. Like I did type some homework up on some typewriters, and it was cool. The one thing when I think about typewriters in the modern sense, and by modern I mean like 1998. You ever seen You've Got Mail?
No, but I honestly the other week started watching old movies from the 90s, and that's on the list.
It is a great movie. You and your wife should watch it. It is a fantastic movie, and it is like literally right in the wheelhouse of like this podcast, because it's like the beginning of the internet. Everybody's having the internet, so more people are chatting on the internet. And Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan, and Greg Kinnear. And Greg Kinnear is very in love with his typewriter, and it's kind of like a running gag through the movie. He collects them, and he's even known at one point in time as that nut who's in love with his typewriter. So when I think of typewriters in a more modern sense, I think You've Got Mail. And I think we can full-heartedly agree that computers have killed the typewriter. Speaking about things that have been killed by other technology, pagers and beepers. Did you have one? I don't know that you would have had one.
No, I didn't, but my dad did. My dad was a cop. It was still in the infancy of, cell phones that were before everybody had them. So I'm talking like the 90s. He had it probably like 95, 96, probably like 95 to like 99. I'd say he had a pager. And I guess, do you want to go over what a pager is? Explain it to the peoples?
For those that are too young to be listening to this podcast, a pager was a small device, and I did a little bit of research for this. They were developed in the 1950s and 60s for pretty much the medical profession, for doctors, which is why a lot of 80s and 90s dramas, especially medical dramas, those doctors were always checking their hips for their pagers.
That makes so much sense.
Doesn't it? Yeah. I mean, when I think back, I'm like, oh, this was a medical device at first. This was a medical alert device at first. And it used, some simple radio technology, I think, at first. And then it developed into like a telephone, a wireless telephone type deal. But they were a little device that had a clip on them, and you could call a number. That pager had a phone number attached to it, and it would beep. And it would display your phone number on the beeper. So whoever had the beep down and say, oh, this person's trying to call me. Cell phones weren't a thing. And if you weren't in a building, you went looking for a payphone. This was how you were paged, or later we called it beeped. Yeah. And I had one. I was late to the game in the pagers, and I thought they were cool because you remember how like Nokia phones were like, everybody had a Nokia phone, that brick of a Nokia phone.
Yep.
And it was cool. It was cool to go to the mall and buy a new cover for it.
Yes.
It was kind of the same thing with pagers. Pagers could be, you had ancillary things that you could decorate your pager with, or buy pagers that had, colorful covers for them. It was a wild time. But I had a pager, and I wish I could remember. If I went online, I could probably find it. It was a watch. And I thought I was the coolest thing ever because it was a pager watch. You could take the strap off of it, and all of a sudden you could put it in a little cover, and it became a regular beeper that you wore on your hip. The coolest thing about it was it would hold contacts on it. And the way you did this was, I still think it's magic. It had a little eye on it, not a camera, but a little like receiving eye on it. And you would hold it up to your computer screen, your CRT computer screen. And you had this other proprietary program on there that you had already put your contacts in. You hold it up to the screen, and the screen all of a sudden went into It was like if you looked at this thing, you'd have an epileptic fit. It just flashed all these like colors and weird designs and stripes, and it just flashed and flashed and flashed. And you had to hold your watch up there to it. And then when it finished, all of your contacts were in that watch.
Somehow modulated all the information from one thing to the other. And
Yeah.
you can't explain it. It just did it.
It just did it. And I thought that was cool, and I paid for the service. Now, here's the thing with pagers. At first, it was just numeric. You could only see the phone number. But eventually, it was alphanumeric, too. So you could technically text somebody on their pager if they paid for that service.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to know that, of course. But back then, you were still using just punch-button phones. So you had to kind of like T9 the message to somebody. Anyway, pagers were a thing. I don't think I remember pagers. After I got my cell phone in 2003, I don't know anybody that had a pager. So we end on pagers, which brings me right into, what if you didn't have a pager? What if you didn't have a cell phone? AOL Instant Messenger, AIM for short. And I was telling Korey earlier today, I could go on forever. We may end up doing a dedicated episode to AOL Instant Messenger because, wow, that's loaded. That was how we lived. We lived and died by Instant Messenger. Am I wrong on this?
We absolutely lived by it. I mean, you would leave for school. You'd set an away message. You'd leave it up all day, even though you weren't home. You'd come home, even if it was for 10 minutes, and you were going to go back out. You'd change that away message or see who's online. It was just how we lived, especially come the early to mid 2000s. That was the communications before the MySpaces and all the social medias. That was the biggest way of communication, I feel, for people that were from the early teens to mid to late 20s.
Absolutely. If I met somebody new and I liked them and I wanted to be their friend, the first thing I'm asking before I leave that person is, what's your Instant Messenger name?
These days, they ask you for your Instagram or your Snapchat handle, but it's the same thing. If you're meeting somebody, that's how it was. It's just that back then you'd have to write it down somewhere, as now you can just pull out your phone and just exchange the information, but it's still the same thing. Just go up 20 years and a generation, and they still do the same way of meeting somebody and exchanging information for a way to contact you via the internet.
No doubt. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head right there. It's not much has changed, but everything's changed. It's just the vehicle for which we do it. I remember the away messages were like you had to craft an away message. Like,
oh yeah,
there was always a double meaning to your away message. It wasn't just I'm laying down and having a ham sandwich. No way. There was lyrics.
Lyrics were the number one thing.
Absolutely. And they always were meant for somebody who was supposed to know who they were meant for. And you always wondered, I see these lyrics. I don't think they're meant for me. Who are they meant for?
And like, yeah, this was like kind of almost like borderline creepy-ish too. But like you could, let's say you had your crush and you had like their screen name. You could always just creep me like, hey, are they on? Maybe today's going to be the day that I'm going to talk to them.
If you were not at your computer screen, you were still stalking by audio. You were listening for that door to open, those sounds. When you could hear somebody pop on, the door would open, and when they would leave, the door would close. You'd be like, oh, who left?
Exactly. Yes.
Then that person would pop back on and be like, oh, I got kicked off the internet.
Times were tough.
I mean, it turned us into a bunch of stalkers, I feel like. You brought up a point. Like, you're always just like, oh, who's on? Is this person on? Is this person really away? Or are they just putting an away message up?
This eventually came to cell phones. And then it was in the palm of your hand. You could still have your away message set at home on your computer, but still also be logged in on your phone, and just it was insane. Like,
I forgot about it. Did have an app eventually.
Did have an app, and even on flip phones eventually, probably by about 04, 05, there was like a weird app that probably cost as much as like a 99 cents a minute because you're probably using the internet, but you'd still use it.
All right. Yeah. So there's a lot here to AIM. We will save for an extra episode because I still have extensive notes on that. But AIM was crucial to an early 2000s teenager. Absolutely. So we salute the AOL Instant Messenger. Speaking of things that we lived and died by, you had mixtapes. I had mixtapes. Did you make your mixtapes from music that you already had, or did you sit by the radio and wait for the DJ to shut up so you could record your favorite song?
So I know a lot of people had that classic way of making a mixtape. I, being that my dad was a DJ, two ways. One, I always had tapes. I didn't have a CD until like the 2000s. So it was always cassette tapes. By the 90s, you could get tapes at like the checkout at the dollar store. So you do that, but my dad was a DJ, so I would come over here and I would just make my own mixtapes of the things that were here. But my dad also being a DJ, as a kid, he would physically make me, I'd be like, oh, I want this song, this song, this song, this song, and he would just make me a mixtape off of whether it be, he would hook up his turntables and play stuff off of his vinyl or CDs. And I still have all those tapes. I've since digitized them to keep them. But yeah, that was my biggest thing of mixtapes, I'd say, is the 90s and those cassettes.
That's fantastic. I actually have one mixtape left from the 90s. And it's a combination mixtape where it was me taping things off of the local high school radio because they had a punk and ska hour once a week. I was just waiting for them to like be quiet so they can play my favorite songs. And I don't know what happened, if the other half of the tape got erased or if I just never made another half, because you'd flip the tape over to side B. There was like a blank half. So I just popped in some CDs and made the rest of that mix myself. But I still have it, and of course I digitized it.
Mm-hmm.
I loved mixtapes, and I do remember making tons of mixtapes.
Got a quick question for you. Did you ever make, especially by I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, when you could easily burn CDs, did you ever make like a mix CD or mixtape and give it to a lady friend?
No doubt. I mean, this is how you did. Like, you see somebody, you have a crush on them. The first thing you're going to do is, first of all, it's the cheapest gift you can give somebody. It's literally the least you could do.
Mm-hmm.
And two, you are hoping now to impress them, A, with your musical taste, and hoping to also appeal to them with your song choice, right?
Right, exactly.
You're hoping they're like, oh, I'll listen to this mixtape. And then they're all like, whoa, I love this guy. Like, that's what we were hoping for.
Because I would say there's two approaches to that. Approach number one is like, here's all these songs that I just think are really cool, and hopefully she likes them and then just thinks like, I'm the most awesome person ever. Or there's the people that really deep down understand like more of the meaning of a certain song, and it's more of there's more of a message in each song that they have now given to that person.
Yeah, there's two differences right there. The first one you've described is the person that is really chill, and you're going to chill with that person. The other person, right, you just found a soulmate.
Yeah.
And then mixtapes for us eventually turned to mixed CDs. Am I right?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, I mean, I had more experience with mixed CDs because those you could make and give to other people a lot easier than coming up with a cheesy tape. Not to mention, like I said, again, I was born in 1989. I wasn't making tapes and giving them to the girls in the 5th grade. I was waiting until high school, and we pressed a couple of CDs and we kept it pushing.
Yeah, so you had more mixed CD experience. I was probably about a 50-50. I'm pretty sure now is mixed playlists. You send somebody a link to a Spotify playlist. I'm pretty sure that's how it's done now.
I don't know. I do teach on the side at a high school, and that's a great question. I should actually write that down and ask the kids, like do a little survey and see like how they do about that these days.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but there's no Riz on that.
Exactly.
So next, something that's completely dead. I don't even think we need to spend a whole lot of time on it, but it's something that you and I both experienced that's just completely dead. VHS, videotapes.
Right. Okay, so it was just almost like the, records. Back at the time, records, you open up Kiss Alive 2, and the big thing about that is the giant stage and all the fire and the flames. Like, that was the artwork and the big panels of that. Once you got to VHS, you could get, like, artwork is always wonderful, but like they had those clamshell cases, those bigger ones that like all the Disney movies would come in and stuff like that. And it was just cool to sometimes just look at them as a kid. That's just me. And VHS also gave you the opportunity to, especially in the 80s, once home box office started becoming a thing. Home box office is HBO for those who don't know that. And you'd be able to just record all the movies that were out, about a month or two. So instead of going to the store and buying them, you buy a tape at the store, you go and you can probably get 3 or 4 movies on one tape, and now bang, there you got that there. So VHS opened up a lot of doors for us in the 1980s.
No doubt. So I loved VHS tapes because it afforded me the opportunity to record my favorite. Now, here's another thing that maybe one day we'll talk about that doesn't exist anymore in this way is Saturday morning cartoons. Every Saturday, ooh, I would beg my mom, and she would record all my favorite Saturday morning cartoons, and I would rewatch them several hundred times throughout the week until the next Saturday. And that was my way of VHS. So the thing about physical media, we switched over from VHS to DVDs, and a big push for that was the PlayStation 2 because it was a DVD player. And as a matter of fact, it was the most affordable DVD player.
Yeah, that was my first DVD player. I got a PlayStation 2 probably about 3 years after they came out, but it was still my first DVD player.
VHS died pretty quickly once that happened, which brings us to something else that died shortly after VHS. The video rental stores were starting to die after VHS died. DVDs came out and they were so accessible and they were coming out a lot quicker. I mean, DVDs were kind of expensive at first, but it didn't seem like people minded buying them because they would share them and they didn't take up as much space as a VHS. Did you just have a Blockbuster or do you remember other video rental stores?
I never had a Blockbuster membership. My local video stores was a West Coast Video. They were a big chain as well, and then they fizzled out, I'd want to say, honestly, early 2000s, maybe 2000, 2001. And we had this other place called Wow Video. They had like 3 locations. That was all the ones that I went to. I know that there was other chains like Hollywood Video, and then obviously the GOAT, the standard bearer was Blockbuster. But yeah, I mean all those places offered different things to us too. Everything from videos to video games. You could rent a video game for a night, take it home and play it, and then there's no way you'd finish it and you'd return it or have to, pay another $8 to rent it again the next day.
So my Blockbuster, you could rent whole video game consoles, and I actually rented a Sega Saturn because I think at the time I only had like a Super Nintendo and I didn't have my N64 yet, but Sega Saturn just seemed so futuristic. I think I got a Batman game with it, and that console was just a dog. It was really terrible loading times. The controls were just so bad for the game, at least for that game. And that's what I loved about Blockbuster was I just took it back after the weekend. I never had to deal with it. I didn't make the mistake of buying a $250 console and then have to live with that choice.
It was the ultimate try before you buy.
100%. Like you said, the GOAT was Blockbuster, and you said you had West Coast Video. I actually had Hollywood Video was the other competitor.
Yes.
We didn't even get a Blockbuster in my town until like mid 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Before, in the 80s, before we even had the Hollywood Video, we had a mom and pop kind of like video rental called Video Thrills. It had the beaded curtain, if you know what I mean.
Oh, a beaded curtain. I felt like the ones that I had like a full black drape curtain.
Okay.
You weren't creeping.
No, yeah, we had the beaded curtain, so there was no hiding.
Right.
You just heard the of the beads like dangling everywhere. And that's the video store where I rented Winnie the Pooh from, like almost on a weekly basis for a while when I was like 5 and 6 years old. My Blockbuster not only had video games and like snacks. You could buy like your popcorn and your Twizzlers and all that and your candy and stuff. But you could also, for a while, it had like a full on like music section, like CDs. Admittedly, I bought Hootie and the Blowfish Cracked Rear View there.
Is that the one with I Only Want to Be With You on it?
Of course it is.
Okay.
Was there any other good, decent, half decent Hootie album?
That's like the only Hootie song I even know.
It had some good songs.
Sorry,
on it.
Darius.
So yeah, so my Blockbuster actually had a small FYE in there. It was like you could just go in there and buy CDs as well.
That's awesome.
I miss Blockbuster and video rental stores, man. Snowstorms, you got to go out before the snow hits and get your video rental.
Oh yeah.
Long weekends or holidays, got to make it out to Blockbuster,
Yeah, man.
Make it a Blockbuster night. Man, we could almost come back to this and do another full episode on video rental stores.
I'd love to.
I salute the Blockbuster and all the video rental stores. One more thing we have, because I know you're a very busy man. One more thing. Smoking sections. Do you remember smoking sections?
I do. Because so we're both in New Jersey. In Philly, it passed in bars, I think, before it fully came through to all establishments. And even at that, it was like mid-2000s.
I think that's probably what happened in Jersey as well. I think you can still smoke in casinos. I'm not 100%.
Yes, you can.
I think in bars, I think it was somewhere around 2006, 2007. All of a sudden, you couldn't smoke in bars.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was till the mid-2000s. But I remember, trying to get a restaurant, table, and your mom just being like, "No smoking, please."
Fingers crossed every time.
Yeah, and then they would end up sitting you next to the smoking section. You're not in the smoking section, but you're next to it, Meanwhile, the dude having a smoke, it's floating over onto your
Yeah.
chicken fingers, and you're just
Amazing.
like, well, what's the point of all this? And then then there's your mom's all like, can we get a seat away from the the smoking section, further away? The smoking section was a joke. If you're in a building and somebody's smoking, the whole building is a smoking section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just like if you went to a hotel and you asked for a non-smoking room. Well, it was only non-smoking because you didn't plan on smoking in it that night.
Right.
Otherwise, I'm pretty sure everything still smelled like smoke because all the laundry in a hotel room got mixed together and washed. So all of a sudden, you've got somebody else's smoked up sheets on your non-smoking room bed. The smoking section was a joke. Everybody smoked like a chimney.
Yep.
And it's just what it was. There was this illusion of a smoking versus a non-smoking section.
Yeah, like I said, as a kid, I came from a non-smoking house, both sides, dad's side and mom's side. So anytime you would go, you'd hope that you'd get in the non-smoking section, but if all they had was the smoking section, then we were sucking it up that night and we were going in there. I don't think there was ever a time where it was more of a concern if there was a booth open than if we were in the smoking section or not.
Yeah. Here's one that I remember. I don't know if you remember this. I know I've even seen some memes about this, but I actually physically remember this. Going into McDonald's, and they had disposable little tinfoil ashtrays. I almost forgot what they were called. Ashtrays with the McDonald's symbol in the middle of it, so you could have your smoke and then throw away your ashtray and your cigarettes when you were done at your table in McDonald's.
Wow, I do not remember.
It was real. That's not a fever
Oh,
dream.
I believe it. But I mean, even if they had them in the 90s, I can tell you that I was probably more ready to just go to the play place.
I don't know if they still had them in the 90s, but man, I remember them in the 80s. And the McDonald's play place, there's a meme that says like life peaked in like the mid 90s, and it shows a McDonald's play place with the N64 kiosk. Do you remember that?
Yes, that I remember.
We lived like kings.
Wow. Like you said that, and I just had like this giant flashback of like everything came like go into like the store, and they'd have like the video games on the TV, and had the sampler discs in them, so you could play a little bit of whatever, and like the controllers are on there. But I just got like this really really big slap of nostalgia in my face when you said that.
Yeah, man, it was real. We lived like kings, and now we live even better without smoking sections and late fees. So,
Wow.
Korey Oats, if you want to tell the people who you are, where you can be found, I know you offer some services. Now's your time. Tell people where they can find you in the local Philly, New Jersey area.
Yeah, so I'm located in South Jersey. I do a lot of a wedding DJ, if you will, in the South Jersey, Philadelphia area. You can look me up at Korey Oats on Instagram. I work for a company called In the Mix Event Group. If you're ever looking for your wedding DJ services, you can always check them out. And I am a radio host as well. I do a retro. We talk about retro. I'm a big fan of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and even the 90s dance musics, the Motown, soul, disco, freestyle, all that type of stuff. And I do a live radio show every single Thursday night for 5 hours, and it streams on Twitch, on Mixcloud, or you can just go to therecordhop.com. And you can find that there. I have hours and hours of old shows too, so if you're just in the mood for some old dance music, I got you covered every single week.
That's fantastic. I know you work super hard and do a lot of things, so I appreciate you coming on the show. When this episode releases, I will start plugging your stuff so people can get familiar with that. Put a face to my new guest. I don't even know what to call you yet. I don't know how many of these we're going to do. You're free to come on here as often or not as often as you like. I think this was a lot of fun. We are definitely going to be doing it again. I think next up, we did talk about doing another one right away. I think we're going to be thinking about the Super Bowl next, correct?
Yes. We did talk about that.
We will put something together for that for sure before the Super Bowl, which I think is somewhere around February 11th. So I think the next episode after this will come out February 2nd.
Yeah, it's crazy. The Super Bowl used to be the last weekend in January, and then they're just like, let's add an extra week to the season. Let's add an extra week to the playoffs. Let's switch the Pro Bowl, which used to be the week after the Super Bowl, put it before the Super Bowl to give them an extra week. And we're just going to make this whole thing out of it so we can drag it out as long as possible.
Yeah, now if we can start doing that to baseball, I'd like a 180-game season. That'd be great. Anyway, thank you, Korey. Thank you very much for coming on here, sir.
Appreciate it. I had a great time, man. Look forward to the next one.
Well, that does it for this round of Once Common Now Extinct. I'm quietly confident there will be more installments of this in the future. I'm also quite sure we're going to see more of Korey Oats on this podcast. If this is your first time listening to The Busy Signal and you liked it, cool, hit the subscribe button. Episodes come out every 2 weeks. For even more retro-nostalgic content, you can follow The Busy Signal on Instagram at BusySignalCast. Don't be shy, say hi. You can drop your thoughts on this episode or any of the other episodes in the comments section. I'll take suggestions on future episodes as well. Once again, thanks to Korey Oats for dropping by on this episode. And thanks to you guys for listening. Until next time, don't forget, reach out and touch the past.